Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You are listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Tambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is Joe Curtis. Joe is, I'll do the official background, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about Joe and how I know Joe. Joe is the Chief Operating Officer at Pango Group. And if you've not heard about Pango Group, probably not surprising. They're not really a technology company in a traditional sense. Pango Group is an escrow and title company in the residential housing market, which is how I know Joe. And again, I'll get to that in just a moment. In Joe's work as COO and previously as an executive vice president, head of sales and marketing, somebody who's built and run sales organizations, Joe is the kind of person who not only embodies a belief system that he leads by, but he also lives by. He is at his core as a person. You're going to hear this when we start talking. He absolutely loves to create and implement strategic systems that are backed and empowered by accountable individuals that are passionate about their company's mission, vision, and values. What that means is Joe is really good at finding excellent sales talent. He's really good at giving them the tools and the training and the leadership they need to be successful. And what that means is that he himself has been a successful leader and executive across the different companies that he's worked with. He's a very giving person. He's very transparent. He's very open about what's worked and what hasn't worked in the past. And the way that I know Joe is through his work in the title and escrow industry. For those of you who might know a little bit more about my background, I've spent about 15 years in the mortgage tech industry, including some time in a company called Altos Research. And with Altos Research, Joe, and at the time, Pickford Escrow, was one of our clients, one of our customers for the market reports that we published. And so that's how I got to know Joe nearly 10 years ago. And through the course of our work together with him at Pickford and me at Altos, we ended up moving into different roles, but I've always kept in touch. Whenever I've been at a mortgage tech conference or a real estate tech conference, I've always made it a point to see if Joe is going to be there. Definitely texted and talked to him throughout the course of the last 10 years about different matters related to sales, about my own company, getting his advice, because I really consider him a close confidant and somebody that I really trust to get his opinion and his perspective on how I might think through some problems or challenges that I'm having with my own company, or some of the ways that I may think about providing solutions to our clients. So I got Joe on the podcast because it was exactly that conversation I was having a couple months ago. I was looking for some perspectives on some ways to think through some different product rollouts and different ways that we might take the direction of the company of what we're doing here at Sales Qualia. And Joe was one of the first people that came to mind. So I shot him a quick text. I said, hey, can you grab some time on the phone? We ended up spending more than an hour on the phone with him, just downloading information and ideas and perspectives on some of the questions that I had. And coming out of that conversation, I said, look, man, if you'd be up for spending even more time with me in the next coming weeks or months, I'd love to have you on the podcast just to talk sales and how you approach it. And he said, absolutely. So that's the background for Joe and why I had him on the podcast, and what all the reasons why you're going to be listening to my conversation with him in just a moment. A couple of the topics that we covered and some things to listen for as we started go into the conversation is, number one, we talked about the difference between a transactional sale and a relational sale. And so for him and his company and his team, what he discovered is that there were about 10% of his accounts that needed to be relational sales, or considered relational sales, meaning they were very high frequency, lots of interaction, lots of frequency of purchases and use of his product and service. And then there were transactional sales, which are less frequent, still important, and still a huge market for him to grab and to serve. But being able to identify and then differentiate the ways that he set up a sales team between the transactional sale and the relational sale is an area where I spent a lot of time discussing, because I know for many of you out there, you're thinking about the difference between an account-based selling system or account-based management system. How do you reach the mid-market? How do you reach the small, medium-sized enterprises that are out there? And one approach does not fit all. So as you're thinking about how you're going to divide up and section out the different customers that you can serve in your marketplace, I think you get a lot of value of this concept on the difference between transactional versus a relational sale. One of the things we talked about in particular was the importance of a follow-up system for those transactional sales, and how many conversations it does take in order to go from an initial point of contact and an initial engagement all the way through to the point where you're actually getting a transaction or you're getting a sale from that customer. I think you'll be surprised to hear some of those numbers. And also, I think you'll find those numbers to be really informative. We also talked about the importance of just being an authentic person and being able to speak human. And that dovetailed into an entire conversation about the importance of really tracking activity and knowing what the key activities are that your sales team should be performing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, and just being able to monitor those activities and then giving your sales team the freedom and the opportunity to just be themselves, because you assumably hired that person because they were a good fit from a cultural standpoint, because you knew that they had a high degree of aptitude. And so it's just a matter of giving them the right skills and giving them the activities that they need to track and perform in order to be successful in the role that you just hired them for. And so we talked quite a bit about that as well. And we also talked about how for his company at Pango Group, he does not have sales quotas with his salespeople. And we talked quite a bit about why he does not use sales quotas at his company. And despite not having sales quota, he and the company have been tremendously successful. So there's just a couple of the key topics. So very much focused on sales management, thinking about territory management, thinking about the sales process. And then we talked about how we layer in training and training opportunities in your sales organization based on knowing your sales process, based on knowing the activities that you need to, each individual rep needs to participate in and activate in order to be successful. And then using those as a starting point to identify training and teaching opportunities across your sales team. So lots of great stuff in this episode. I think you're really, really going to enjoy it. So without any further ado, over to my conversation with Joe Curtis. Joe Curtis.
What's happening, man?
Every time I see your name, I want to say Joe freaking Curtis.
I love that. I'll take it.
Dude, are you ready to just jump right in? Should we do this?
Yeah, man. We can totally do it. I can even do, oh shoot, I don't have a video thing on here.
That's okay. This way we can guarantee that I'll be the best looking man on this conversation. Otherwise.
I think that's already guaranteed.
So I've already done, like whenever I do these interviews and conversations, I always go back and do an introduction after we've talked. So by the time people have gotten to this part of the conversation, they already know a little bit about you and your background. But I wanted to start the conversation just by asking you, like, hey, when people ask me, hey, what do you do, Joe? How do you answer that question?
Oh, such a good question. I'm still working on it. I think it's a work in progress. I have to enunciate very well because I say I run an escrow company. And if I'm talking too fast, people think I run an escort company, and that's drastically different.
Which, depending on how the sales are going, sometimes you might be.
Yeah. So I have to enunciate very well. But I mean, basically I say I work with people to grow stuff. And that's kind of my thing. And the medium that I do that in is in real estate, and kind of where I found myself is in this little great cottage industry called escrow and title. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And then they're like, what is escrow again? And then you got to go through
what
like,
exactly is escrow and title?
Did you write a check to somebody? Did somebody hold it? So we're the company that does what a lot of attorneys do on the East Coast. Mm-hmm. And we hold the money in a transaction and make sure that, all of the parties are doing what they say they do. And then we help them record the deed at the county courthouse at the end of the transaction. Everybody's good. Cut all the checks. People get their money. People get their house. Pretty exciting.
Well, yeah, it's pretty exciting, especially when you finally get the keys to your house and you walk in the door the first time. You're like, holy crap. I just spent a lot of money.
Yeah, no kidding.
And to give yourself proper due, not only are you in title or escrow, you're the chief operating officer of Pango Group. So
yes, yep.
Just to be clear, I mean, previously executive vice president, you've been EVP of sales and marketing, not just in the title escrow area, but also you've done, director of sales work and sales consulting over the years as well.
Oh yeah, sales. So I got on the operations side from the sales channel, and that's my favorite thing is like, if I can be on the growth, I learned a long time ago that you want to be on the growth end of businesses, not the expense end. And just sales is just what I love to do. Like having sales organizations, building out sales teams, building out the revenue kind of like model for companies. And I think that's the most fun lever to pull. Let's just put it that way when you're pulling levers in business.
Yeah, I like the way you just framed that. You want to be on the growth side of the business, not the expense side of the business. because that's where you get a lot more, different types of creativity. And that is exactly why I wanted to have you on the podcast here, Joe, because you and I spoke, it's probably been about 2 months where I sent you a random text message. It's like, hey man, can I ask you a couple quick questions about sales? And you so kindly was like, yeah, man, sure, whatever. Just give me a call. And I don't know if you remember the initial question I asked you, but I said, I want to play some word association. And when I say the phrase sales training, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Do you remember your answer?
I don't remember my answer off the top of my head.
You said
needed?
No, you didn't say needed, but close. You said long.
Long. That's right. I did. Okay. I do remember this. Yeah. Long.
And so, that sparked a whole line of conversation that you and I had around, like, what does it mean to do sales training with an organization where you've got, whether you've got 5 people or 50 people, you're constantly, as a manager of people, whether you're a sales manager, COO, or CEO, you're constantly training and retraining and retraining, and sometimes training new people that have no experience, sometimes training people that have been doing something for 20 years, and you've got to untrain them on the old way and retrain them on the new thing. And that's a lot of what I wanted to talk through, and on how, as somebody who's been sitting on top of these organizations and building and growing teams, how does one, especially people listen to this podcast, being CEOs of growing companies, especially tech startups, they've never had to think about sales training before. They're like, I'm just hiring salespeople to go sell my stuff. But as those companies start to grow and the teams start to grow, and you have a diversity of experience and a diversity of maturity in the organization, like how do you actually create an environment that enables the team to function in the way that you need them to function?
Yeah.
So if I had a first question, maybe to kick off this part of the conversation, when you said either needed or long, like, tell me more. Let's dig into those 2 words. When we talk about sales training, why does it seem to be long, or why does it always seem to be needed from your perspective?
So I'll go with the long first. I think, at least my personal experience is, these sales trainings that I've participated in have been, a lot of, here's the whole sales process that you should have. Here are all the things that you can do. Here are the words you can say, and that you have some practice, but it's this, big, long, intense, and there's a motivation part of it because sales is hard, right? And so sometimes they can be content light and motivation heavy. And so I think that was my word association, was with these traditional kind of like sales training, is like, there's a lot of work to get done and to understand like how you sell a product or a service, but it takes time to really do that right. But I think that there's some fundamentals from a sales standpoint that are really important to kind of pay attention to. And if you can kind of frame those and then work on them little by little, I think, to answer your question about how do you create the environment, you do that. And I use, and I've historically used sales meetings to really do that.
Tell me more about that. Like, when you say you use sales meetings to teach them these fundamentals, how frequently are you meeting with the team? How are you running the team? How do you inject some training meanwhile doing all the other stuff that needed to happen in the sales meeting?
Yeah. So the thing about sales is, like, I think it's in leadership in general, you have to get used to saying the same things repetitively, even though that you know them as a leader. Like, your people need to hear them several times. And just because you say them to several different people, that you need to say things, repeated over and over and over again. And so one of those things is like, how do you sell, and what is your sales process? Like, what type of sale you're doing, and having everybody really have a firm understanding of, like, are you doing a transactional sale or are you doing a relational sale? Right. And then if the relational sale is where it is, or if it's a transactional sale, there's pretty much a process somebody else has figured out, right? You may have some little tweaks on your industry, because every kind of company and every industry has what I like to call terminal uniqueness syndrome, right? Like, oh, no, that can't apply to us. We're totally different, right? It's our thing is totally unique, right? But at the end of the day, like, from a sales standpoint, if we're relational or transactional, like, most people have figured it out, or someone smarter than us has figured out, hey, here's kind of the general milestones that you need to kind of get through. And so it's not necessarily reinventing the wheel. It's just identifying, where you are. And then you take little pieces of your sales process and you have conversations about how it's actually happening in the field or on the phone with your reps. And then you deconstruct where are you getting caught up? Let's say you're a transactional salesperson and you have to work by appointment and you're trying to set appointments. And, I have somebody that's making a lot of calls, but not talking to a lot of people. Well, to make appointments, you need to talk to a lot of people, not just make a lot of calls. So are you calling the right people? Are you doing, and you can deconstruct little components and really work on those specific components with the team. And then you can rely on the team to say, hey, there's this person who's really good at getting people on the phone. They talk to a ton of people, but they don't set any appointments. Well, let's get that person in conversation or in a dialogue on the team on somebody that doesn't really get anybody on the phone, but when they do, they make an appointment every time that sticks, right? And so I think that's where the majority of the sales training that we've done, we spend time on kind of deconstructing a component of the sales process and like digging in and how do I sharpen my skill in that particular area that can move, something down the pipeline.
Okay, this is really good. So did you say that you feel like you have a transactional or relational sale? Remind me.
Both.
Oh,
so I have both.
For your business.
In our case, for our business, and it's something that I just discovered probably in the last couple of years is, our sales top producers or the top 10% of the market are really relational driven, meaning they have established relationships. And if you're going to win that business, you're going to be breaking an established relationship that they have. And so you need to be able to build a relationship and add value to that. And that takes time. And our outside sales team does that. And they do that really well. There's this whole other segment of the market that I think we kind of paid attention to or treated exactly the same as the top 10% of the market. But they were only doing 2 or 3 transactions a year. And so the relationship that they had with their current, vendor that we do, or their current escrow company, wasn't as important because they don't have that routine. They don't have the consistency. But man, there's a lot of those people out there that can direct this business, and that, it might not be worth an outside salesperson's time to, spend the time with somebody that's going to give you, do you want to spend time with somebody that's going to give you 100 deals or somebody that's going to give you 3, right? Well, if you have a good, incentive program and you have a motivated salesperson, they're going to go for the 10, the 100, deals every day. And so what do you do with that long tail? And what we found out is that was really more inclined or geared towards transactional sales. And so we hired an inside sales team, and they have done a really bang up job, but it's a different type of sale. So to answer your question, we have both, which is honestly really fun to kind of see the difference between the two and then where they intersect, the inside sales versus the outside sales team. But yeah, to answer your question, we have both. And so you have to kind of manage both of those processes, but knowing that they're distinctly different. A relationship sales takes longer, right? So, yeah.
So I was harkening back to, I spent some time at CoreLogic, which is a very large company and lots of different sales teams. And so there were, 6 or 7, major account reps, people that would call on Wells Fargo and Chase and US Bank. And then that was kind of the top 20 accounts were covered by those 5 or 6 or 7. And then the rest, then you had the kind of mid-market, which was, roughly, 20 through 200 in terms of size. And then you had 200 through the rest of the world. And
exactly. Yeah, very similar.
So only the top reps did any kind of travel, and they were on the road constantly. The rest from 200 down were all inside sales. And, the inside sales people, if you're handling accounts number 20 to 200, you would have 50, 60, accounts. And then from 200, even further, you have hundreds of accounts.
Yeah.
And you're almost reactionary. Like you can't build a relationship when you have 200 accounts you're managing.
It's transactional.
Every day.
Yeah.
It's very transactional. So was there something, this is a really important point I hadn't even thought about talking about today. And I'm glad that you brought it up. So like as a lot of companies that listen to this, a lot of people listen to this are startups. And so, I hear people that I work with, they start talking about different, as you start to grow out of those first, whether it's first 10 customers, your first $1 million or $2 or $3 million in revenue, you start to see this emergent trend where you're like, okay, well, we have our large enterprise, we have our mid-market segments. How did you come to realize like these top 10% were relational and the rest were transactional? Was there like an aha moment, or was it just a compilation of over time?
No,
we had one outside person and then a second and then a third, and then you realize like, oh shit, actually we have a bunch of relational.
Yeah. So being in this industry for around 15 years, everybody will say it's a relational business. And so I think without really looking at data, right, and going with what everybody had done before and what was working, we said, hey, outside sales is the way to go. Like you go out, you build relationships, and you get business to come in. And that's kind of how it was done. And then the value that I feel like I added to that process in our business is saying like, okay, well, how do you just provide some structure so that those outside salespeople can succeed, right? How do you set really clear expectations? How do you give them support? And how do you do that in a meaningful way where we're not, how do you establish territories and make sure that, like we're working together, not against each other, and incentives. So there's all these components from a sales management standpoint that you can put together to make a, optimized environment for that. But honestly, to answer your question, this really came from us getting better at collecting data and implementing a CRM, right? And understanding what was out there and who was getting called and not getting called. And the aha moment was, hey, I have all these leads. So we have, outside sales, we have a structure that's a territory. We have all these leads that are not really in a territory. And I'm not sure if they're worth going after, because if I look them up, they do only a couple transactions, but they're there. I mean, like they could give us business, but we weren't paying attention to them. So one of my employees and I just started kind of brainstorming and saying like, well, what if, we could get some of that business? Like, what are the factors that would help us? And so we kind of went through some of the pros and cons, and we made a decision like, hey, let's just give it a shot and hire an inside salesperson and see what we can do. And that turned into, we went down a couple of wrong paths in terms of like who we were calling and what we were doing. But it was really just saying like, hey, our current sales team is not calling on everybody in the market. Let's say they have 1,000 potential prospects in a territory. Like a human being can't really build a relationship with more than 200. Like it's just, and I think that I'm not going to pretend to be an anthropologist, but I've read somewhere, right? They say that you have kind of like this limit of the number of people that you can really have a relationship with. And so if you have so much opportunity that you're not able to actually get to, then how do you attack that? And we just found that really lended itself to transactional. And just from a logistical standpoint, like I can't send everybody into the greater reaches of every little nook and corner of California, which is where our business is primarily based in. I needed to do that in a centralized place, and that was an inside sales, and like they didn't travel, and that kind of took off.
And how much
that was a long kind of like rambling answer to the aha.
Not at all.
Like it was really like looking at data and saying like, man, we're missing opportunity. Is there another way that we could do this that's just different than what we've always thought, which was outside sales?
All right, folks, we are off and running in my conversation with Joe Curtis. One of the things I want to share really quickly is, while we're taking a break here from my conversation with Joe, it's a good opportunity for you to take a break, maybe from the podcast, or at least leave a note to yourself to head over to salesqualia, QUALIA.com. Why am I sending you over to the website? Because on the homepage, you're going to see a banner that says, check out my new book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. You'll see a cover of the book, and you'll see a button that says Start Reading Now. Not only can you start reading now when you click that button, you can actually download the entire book, the entire PDF version of my new book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. Ramp up your B2B startups repeatable revenue with the Q framework. So yeah, you can go over to Amazon and buy a copy if you want to. There's a Kindle version as well. Would love it, of course, if you want to buy a copy. But hey, if you just want to download the PDF and share it with your team, that would be awesome too, because I think you're going to get a ton of value of reading that book, especially because we're talking about the importance of knowing and building your sales process and key activities. Everything in that book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, is based on the Q framework. So the Q framework is a framework that I developed over 20 years of selling to the enterprise. and working with as a head of sales with 3 different startups. And this Q framework can be the baseline of your sales process so that you can build out your sales process, get some repeatability and eventually scalability in the work that you're doing to make the impact that you want to make in your market. So definitely go over to salesqualia.com, download a copy of Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. I want to get this book out to as many people as possible. I don't care if I sell a copy or I just give them all away for free. What's more important is that we get this message out and I get this book out to as many people, especially startup founders in the B2B enterprise space as possible. So that's it. If you haven't done it already, make a note to yourself and make sure you do it. Send a note to your assistant, send a text to yourself and say, hey, later on, make sure I download that copy because I do want to make sure you get a copy of that book. Okay, that's it for now. Let's get back to my conversation with Joe Curtis.
Yeah, so if you think about, like in your case, to just consider your total addressable market to be the state of California, how much of that market did you feel like you were missing because they weren't in a territory but needed coverage? Was it half of the transactions fell into the other 80% of the accounts you couldn't cover with a physical, outside person? Do you happen to remember what that data looked like?
Yeah. So we looked at the number of leads and we had to make some assumptions around the proximity to an office because there's still something to be said about being close to one of our offices where you can come in. And so I don't think technology really makes that necessary with all of the technology we have with, electronic documents and signing and all of that. But there's a perception, and like the farther away that you get from an office, the harder it is to overcome that perception of distance, right? So to answer your question, it felt like there were 25 to 30% of the transactions out there that we just weren't even getting an at bat for. Now we thought that there were going to be a lower percentage of transactions, right? Like we'd get a lower percentage of them, but like we thought that was a huge opportunity that we were just missing.
Well, the cost benefit of like getting an inside salesperson and spinning that person up, and you have base salary, you have some benefits, you have office space, all that. Those expenses is probably
for sure.
You pay commission, but that's only on success. So probably, I'm guessing like fully loaded, like your expense is probably like $150K for one person.
That's about right.
And so you look at your total addressable market, you look at it for $150,000. There's whatever size, a couple $1 million worth of business here.
Exactly.
If that person can build up $1 million territory, then at least getting, 8x, 7x ROI. Figure out how to turn it into a $10 million business. Then we hire 3 or 4 reps, and we then own that business. We own those accounts because nobody else is probably calling on them either. Because it's not like
local
the other guy.
Companies there are, but
yeah, okay. But you have an advantage because you have bigger platforms, better structure, better products, all those kinds of things.
Honestly, our advantage. So here's some interesting stuff. Our advantage is that if you have a really great follow-up system, you can get business from almost anywhere. If you have a really, really great follow-up system. And so I know, so now the inside sales team has an inside sales manager and 4 inside sales reps. And they bring in probably 200 new clients a year and will do $2 million in revenue in their second year, right? So not bad from zero, right? So that's $2 million we wouldn't have ever had. And the biggest, what's really interesting is, I can tell you like just the fact is of all of the clients and all the business that we've gotten, it takes 9 conversations. I think it's 8.6. I'm rounding up.
Dude, I love this. 8.6. And that's from the initial conversation, like the initial outreach?
That is from the initial conversation, right? Not the initial outreach, because initial outreach could be I just sent them a prospecting email. So sure. I'm not talking about like how many times we've pushed something at them. I'm talking about like how many actual conversations we've had, right? In interaction, I would consider like a text interaction a conversation. I would consider like an email that I send that gets a response a conversation, right? So these aren't just all just phone, like I have to be on the phone with them 9 times, but like 9 times, it takes 9 times from my initial conversation, like, hi, I'm Joe, right? Like, this is what we do. Right. This is what you do. We'd love to be of value, to they've sent me and I have opened an order in our system where I'm going to realize revenue.
Wow. So conversations could be like interactive engagements of some kind.
Yep.
Yeah. Wow.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's been consistent for the last 2.5 years. Like that number hasn't moved.
And
we're trying to figure out how do we do it.
No, go ahead.
In 6 conversations. We're trying to be like, how do you get there in 6 conversations versus 9?
6-minute ad.
I haven't
6-minute ad.
Totally. But I'm not sure. I don't know. I haven't cracked that nut yet. I mean, it's an interesting puzzle to try to solve, but we haven't figured it out. So 9's the number.
So how did you get to that number? How could you calculate that? I'm just thinking logistically, like even if I have a great CRM, like how do you add up a text conversation plus a phone conversation plus the email to get to the 9? Like, do you have your reps tracking that stuff manually or?
Yes. Yeah. So we use a CRM called Zoho, which is a super simple kind of CRM. Salesforce is kind of like the Ferrari, whereas like I think Zoho is more like a Ford, right? And it's been a really really simple process of tracking calls, emails, and we overlay a text feature on Zoho called Kixie, which you can have text that just logs it into the system, and you can literally track it. And you can say, okay, initial contact was here, and so we have our inside sales manager run reports on a quarterly basis to see if we're moving that number at all.
Okay.
And so then we go back, right? So then this goes back into sales training, right? So then you go back and you say, hey, just so you know, right? It takes 9 touches or 9 conversations to get somebody to give you a deal. So have you had 9 conversations with them? Because if you haven't, you're not there yet, right? Like if you stopped at 3 and you said, oh, they're never going to give me a deal, like you're selling yourself short. So look at your list, and if you're taking people off your prospect list or your priority list that you've only talked to twice, maybe you should reconsider that. And so it's using some of like the real world data and kind of saying, and then the training is like, how do you set up a system so that you can say, hey, over the next 6 months, I want you to have a conversation like 9 times in these various medias with your top prospects. Ready, go.
Yeah, and it also takes the pressure off. Like in some respects, like as a salesperson, there's always this sense like, oh man, like I had like 3 or 4 calls with this person, and they're not ordering anything. I must be doing something wrong, or I bet you my manager's gonna be pissed. Like everyone else is getting the deals around me, and I'm not getting any.
Yeah.
But if instead you just like, okay, look, like I did 4. I'm almost halfway there. It's gonna take another 3 months to get the next 4. But if I just keep moving the needle, like if I have my 100 accounts, and I'm just looking at 9 touches per account, and I can just, okay, this account I'm at 6, this one I'm at 3, this one I'm at 8. So if I don't get one on the 9th or the 10th, I'm probably then doing something wrong individually. And then for you as a manager, you can see if you have some reps that have done 12, 13 touches or conversations, not touches, conversations, and they're not converting deals, then that's an opportunity to train and say, well, how are you, what's the content and context of these conversations? Is it like, hey, how was your trip to Austin, Texas? Or
100%. Exactly.
Something more meaningful?
Yeah. We've learned that when, at least on the inside sales side, that when you're building a relationship and they know something about you personally and you know something about them, like those deals come, right? Yeah. If it's just superficial, like, hey, I just want your business. This is what we do. Here's our value. Here's our value. Like they take longer. They don't come. Because everybody wants to do business with people that they like and they feel a connection with. And I think what we've learned is you can do that over the phone, and you can do that digitally. You know what I mean? And they can be great clients. They can be really great clients. I think I used to think that transactional sales was just this, car salesman, I'm just trying to get this transaction and get something from you. And it doesn't have to be that at all. I've just learned a lot by watching our guys do that. And man, it's so good for the sales training because when you have the data, you can just say, here's what it is, and then help people set up systems. Like all of the sales training that we talk about, or I think that, when I say needed and long, is that, hey, I'm going to teach you how to do all this other stuff. And then they're so focused on what to say and how to say it. And in reality, if you are just your own authentic person having a conversation with somebody, and you set up a system to have many of those conversations a day, you will be successful in sales. So it's really about how do you as a salesperson or how to use a sales manager or a trainer teach reps, not necessarily what to say. There is some of that. And I would say that's really coaching. You know what I mean? And you can do situational coaching and the moment coaching around that. But like if you're going to train somebody, train them how to get people to the ninth conversation, not what to say in every conversation. Because I think getting to the ninth is more important than what you actually say. Like picking up the phone is more important, right? So it's really activity based than it is content based. Because if you're just your own human and you approach every call with, what's going on with you and wanting to honestly find out what's going on with somebody else, you will have a career in sales, or you can have a career in sales.
You can, or if you're, if you're a founder of a company, you're just trying to figure out how do I do the sales thing. I mean, you said something I think is really important to be your own authentic person. And I mean, we had a coaching call this morning with one of our the CEOs in our group, and she was saying like, I'm afraid to pick up the phone. I'm afraid to email people. And I said, well, what if instead of like picking up the phone and feeling like you have to sell them stuff, what if you just picked up the phone and you talk to them about their problem and the reason that you started the company and why you're dedicated your life to focusing? Like you could go get a $300,000 job as a research scientist. We both know that. But instead, you decided to start this company, build a product, eat ramen noodles because you believe so much in this problem. What if you just called and talked about the problem? They're like, she's like, you could do that? I'm like, yeah.
You're like, yeah, it's called sales.
That's you, right? That's you being your authentic self. And that's frankly the stuff they care about anyway. They don't want to hear about a bunch of product features and why the buttons are blue. So one of the mantras I'm constantly telling people is just speak human. You don't have to speak sales or, give somebody the gun. Just speak human to people.
Yep.
Yeah. And secondly, this idea of activity-based versus content-based, I think this is another place where, you mentioned sales tools like Zoho and Kixi and those kinds of things. And I think those are important tools to have, but the tools aren't the ones doing the work. It's just like if I've got a toolbox and I'm a carpenter, the carpenter does the work. The tools help them do the work.
Correct.
You don't put the box of tools on the floor and the hammer magically jumps out and starts like hammering nails. Like the carpenter still has to know how to use the tools. And there's so much automation nowadays. We're like, I set up this 8 email sequence and these is exactly the words in every single email that I'm sending out. And all I'm basically doing is paying my salesperson to click send, thinking that like
that's a marketing function.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're taking the human element of like, why did I hire this person in the first place to do sales? Well, because I felt like they could talk to people and help them figure out what the problems were.
Well, but you're exactly right about those just being tools, right? And so I think that the focus on training, like if part of our topic is like really like sales training and how do you incorporate that, it's really focused on how do you teach your folks, your apprentices, right? How to use the tools for using the carpenter, right? Analogy. It's like, how do you use this tool? Like this little awl is different than this finish hammer, which is different than this, plane. And they're for different things. And here's how you do it. And everybody's going to glom onto a different component and say, hey, I'm really good at this. And then you can get people to teach each other. But it's really about how do I use those tools? And most people talk about process, right? Most people talk about what to say and motivation. And I think that if we would do a lot better as a sales industry if we just said, hey, here's some of the tools. And they can be simple. They don't have to be complicated things, right? You don't need to have Zoho and Kixi to do all of these things. And I think, frankly, some people jump into that too soon before they even can articulate their sales process. Well, let's just get Salesforce, right? That'll help us define our process, right? And I'm not sure that always works. And you probably see that a lot more than I do.
Well, I mean, I get that question all the time. Like, what CRM should I use? I'm like, well, there's 2 ways. The first answer to the question is whatever CRM you actually use every day is the right one for you. And the way you figure that out is you have to figure out what your process is first manually by whether it's sending the emails yourself or texting people or picking up the phone. And after you know what your selling process is, then you go find the CRM that best matches what you need. Because like you said, in your case, you bought Zoho and you're using Zoho. I know lots of people that successfully use Zoho, but there's other companies that could never use Zoho. That's why there's 60 billion CRMs out there, because they all do. 100%. They're all designed to solve slightly different versions of the same problem, which I got to be able to track my leads and my deals in my pipeline. But every company is different. There's lots of overlap, but ultimately, I mean, I coached a guy that was part of an accelerator program. He had 0 customers, barely had an MVP, but he had like 5 or 6 sales tools in his tech stack. He was sending out like 1,000 emails a week. He had his whole funnel. Like, I'm sending 1,000 emails and I get like 12% open rate and 2% reply rate and then a 1% booking rate, blah, blah, blah. And he had no sales. I'm like, dude, like, throw all that shit away. Like, pick up the phone and talk to people and figure out what you actually need to do to get the right person on the phone. Then we can go back and build out that funnel with the email sequence.
Yeah. Yeah. I think people overly rely on automation, marketing automation. I mean, marketing does some really cool things. And it works in a lot of areas, but I think that like one-on-one human contact that is not just an email or an automated email or scripted email, or a text it's where you can ask every single one of my salespeople. Like, that's where the money is. It's what tips the edge on why somebody might use us than somebody else. Because there's lots of competitors out there, right? Unless you have like the most unique thing in the world, right? Unless you're selling the iPod, when the iPod first came out and there's nothing else left to it, right? Then, which most people are not necessarily doing, right? Then I think that the relationship matters, and you can have a relationship in transactional sales and in relational sales. So
if I want to go back up a level, because we got talking about the transactional sale and hitting, the 20, 25, 30% of the market. But then you also have your outside sales team, which is more relational.
Yep.
And so in your case, you started off with your sales team being fully relational, and then you kind of backed into the transactional piece.
Yep.
And what you and I just talked about is how often it seems like the setup is like, well, everything is transactional, and then they don't do the relational stuff. So is there, like, in your experience, how would you think about going in reverse order? Like, if I'm doing everything transactionally, now that I understand what the definition of a transactional sale is, how would I look to carve out part of what is now transactional that may or may not be successful, that may or may not be successful at selling, but in fact should be relational? What would be some signals that I might carve out part of my accounts or part of my customer base and actually assign somebody who is much more relational? Or even
so let's draw a distinction, because I think before I would put anybody into a funnel, right, in a sales funnel, I just want to make a distinction that I think that transactional and relational sales have to do with kind of, I think, like the frequency of transactions and the importance of like having a personal relationship is in winning business. And so the way that we define that in our business is like, hey, transactional do less transactions, so you have to do more of those clients, right? So you don't spend as much time with them. Now, I do want to make sure that I'm really advocating for, like, in both scenarios, whether it's transactional or relational, like, you need to have a relationship. Like, there is the speaking human, as you said, right? Like, that doesn't get taken out. And so if the definition of transactional sales is I'm putting somebody on an automatically marketed drip system, I mean, like, a pure transactional sale would be, I'm selling, sunglasses, and I have a product, and I send out 10,000 emails. I get a click-through rate of 12%, 2%, right? And then this many people hit purchase, and then boom. I think that's a transactional sales that is like totally absent a person, right? And so if you have a product like that, then you can get some really cool. But if you're in, a startup world where you need to really have conversations with people that can buy in on your product, whether it's transactional or relational, it's like you need to figure out what your process is, in that, And if you have this automated process where you're reaching out to prospects, you got to figure out how to insert the human part into it. And so in that example where I'm saying like, hey, you have this 8-step automated thing, like they don't even go into the top of my pipeline until I can have a conversation. Right? Mm-hmm. Until I'm getting like a two-way interaction. You can define a conversation as just a two-way interaction. You can just say it's just that. I replied to an email, right? The reply could be, go jump in a lake. Don't ever email me again, right? Well, okay, that's a reply, and I know where they go now, right? It's not ambiguous, right? Or there's like, yes, I'll talk to you, and there's like, yeah, no, right now it's not the time, but it's not a no, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's really, you asked about like the trigger of moving from transactional to maybe more relational. I think it's, how do you seek having that two-way interaction with a client and using that two-way interaction with the client as kind of like your first filter to get you to be able to have that conversation.
Yeah,
to build that relationship.
So definitionally, relationship is different than relational. Relationship is necessary in both transactional and relational sales.
Yes.
But the frequency of transaction or the frequency of the purchase is what defines transactional versus relational. And the relational ones where there's a much more frequent or much larger purchase on a more frequent basis, that's where you're going to need to have somebody who can, whether it's outside sales or be in front of customers on a regular basis, understand their business. That's where your 10% fall in.
Yeah. Yep.
Got it. Okay. So that being said, is there any measures, like you had some metrics around in your case, and I know this is just talking about you, but I think it's useful to, and your numbers are not universal numbers, but it's interesting to talk through some of these numbers. So you have 8.6 conversations to get to a transactional sale. Is there any metric that you use that moves or would indicate that, okay, this is actually not transactional, this should be relational? Do you have any benchmarks or anything? Or even some frameworks that you would give somebody listening to think about, to say, like, maybe you should question whether or not transactional is the right way to run this versus relational.
So it's so interesting. So the two teams used to operate in kind of like a relative isolation, right? And so I'm going to describe to you how we've kind of evolved to answer that question. So it used to be, I have a territory, I have a sales rep, they cover everybody in that territory. Let's say there's 1,000 people. We already discussed that they can really only kind of like have any type of meaningful focus on 250 of them, right? We have this inside sales team that was working on everybody else, right? Like looking at all of the other information that were outside of those territories. And so, you asked about the bridge between, when does it turn into a relational sale versus like, what's the trigger point? And so, we've always kind of used like, hey, in that 3 to 4 transaction range a year. So think about like 1 transaction a quarter is kind of like that transactional relationship for us. And then if you're doing 1 a month, so 10 or more transactions, you're in the relational world, right? I got a deal a month. I'm constantly working with an escrow officer. I'm in constant contact with an escrow officer, a title person. Like they're, you know what I mean? So there's that relationship. That's a relation, right? So greater than 10, super easy. Well, there's this gray area that's less than 10, greater than 4, right? And so for us, and so what we've done is and now we've just stripped out territory, right? And we're having our inside salespeople collaborate with our outside salespeople on that gray area. So where they intersect. And the hardest thing to figure out about that was how do you compensate them so that they're not competing, which we figured out. Right. And so now, we call that our hybrid, right? So we have our hybrid. So we have our outside sales, and they're now going after 250 people. That's just theirs that they own. We call it their tribe. And then we have the hybrid, which they go after and the inside sales guys go after. And then you have like the lower transactional that the inside sales are just going after. And so we've matched up an inside salesperson with kind of basically 2 territories for outside salespeople, and they go after that kind of like that bubble group in the hybrid. So
I love that you call the 250 is your tribe, because I think just like from a mindset standpoint, then that it sort of forces you to think about them not as customers or clients or deals.
Oh yeah, no, that's my
like,
tribe.
no, this is my tribe. These are the people that I'm working with every day. You know, we're hand in hand in this world that we live in. This is my tribe.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think you treat them differently if you know they're part of your tribe as opposed to a customer. You know?
Oh, these are my prospects, or
right. That's my prospects. Yeah.
Language matters sometimes with salespeople, right? Like nobody likes to do sales, but if you say, "Hey, let's go make some relationship calls," they're like, "Oh, right, cool."
Yeah, that's a good point. So we had, again, harkening back to the previous experience, a long time ago, I cut my teeth selling college textbooks back in the late 90s with Pearson, Prentice Hall. And so I'd go to campuses, and I had my territory outside. I was an outside rep based in Charlotte, North Carolina. I had, I think, 18 or 20 universities and community colleges that I'd call on. Some big 4-year schools, some 2-year schools. And then within those big universities, there were certain departments like computer science or engineering. They're actually pretty small classes. Like at UNC Charlotte, they had an engineering department. They might have 30, 40 people in a mid-level class versus, you know, general chemistry, there's like 700. So of course, as a rep, I would want to spend my time on the 700s. But the company realized, like, okay, well, he's on campus, but he's like, the outside reps are not calling on these departments. So they set up an inside team that was designed to cover those outside accounts by phone, but we had a hybrid model. And so I had this woman, still remember her name, is Gretchen, who was assigned, like, she and I were partners in these certain departments. And my manager would say, look, like just one day a month, you don't have to go sell chemistry. You don't have to go sell principles of economics. We just spend one day a month in these other departments, because Gretchen will have done all of the legwork. Like, she called them on the phone. She sent them a sample. She got their syllabus. If you just knock on the door and say, hey, you might remember talking to Gretchen on the phone. Oh yeah, I love Gretchen. She's great. She sent me a copy of this book. It's sitting on the desk. Oh, cool. What questions do you have? Do you need anything else? You know, could you send me a copy of the instructor's manual? Because I think that might be the difference between buying your book or the other book. I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. Boom. Email Gretchen, send the instructor's manual. And we just dominated computer science, engineering, electronics, technology. Like that for those years, we just dominated the department. And we had a hybrid model where we both got bonus, and it was a way to get coverage. And at the end of the day, the customer experience was phenomenal. Because nobody else was getting that kind of love. Yeah. Because I'm spending time in the intro courses, but not in these sort of specialized courses.
Yeah. So we were worried about, like, hey, are the reps going to spend all their time here and not really work on their own business? Are they, and we found that it's just a great kind of like marriage between the two. You know what I mean? Like, there's definitely space for both, because, you know, some of the really top producers, as good as you are on the phone, want to meet you and want to see you and you know what I mean? Want to build that relationship over time and know that you're not going anywhere and all of that kind of stuff. But man, this hybrid, I think, just like you experienced, has been a really cool kind of evolution of our business. And I think that's true. You know, it's interesting, you know, as you worked with startup companies and as they kind of figure out, hey, what is going to be my sales approach? How do I build out a sales organization? I think thinking about things like, we're projecting forward, like how you're going to approach it, and what is a mature kind of like sales organization look like, and does it incorporate some of these things where you're like, you start off relational and then you discover the transaction. It's how do you apply that in your particular model and getting over that terminal uniqueness syndrome you have.
Yeah, dude, I totally agree. I love that. I think, by the way, I think I had a little audio skip there because my headphones died. So I'm not sure how
that happens.
All of that came through, but I think
it was brilliant. It was brilliant. It was really just
no. I think the concept of the hybrid model is one that I think like you're thinking about, because like you said, you discover this gray space and as teams are growing, you have to figure out a way to solve this problem, and maybe it's not either or, maybe it's an and solution.
Yeah.
To that problem, right?
100%.
So, you know, we started the whole conversation talking about sales training, and we've the sales team and thinking about, how do you organize those as a company? This is our sales process. Let's look at the individual steps, or how do we calibrate how you as an individual are performing in each of these steps to make sure that, okay, maybe you're doing steps 1, 2, and 3 really well, but steps 4 and 5, you're falling off. And so you talked about this idea of just like training being focused on how do we put our process into action for your individual work. Is that the right way you think about it?
Yeah. I would say, I can describe our sales process really, really simply, right? It's like you have prospects at the top of the funnel, call that like phase 1, right? Where you're having conversation, right? Two-way conversation. Phase 2 is you have now developed a relationship, meaning like, more than like where they work and you've had more than a conversation. So could be conversations like 3 through, right, 7. Phase 3 is they have given you a commitment. Scott, I will send business your way, right? And in our business, they don't sign a contract right there and then give it to you and then you're done and then I just build them later and then, operations fulfills it. It's, I can get a commitment 4 months in advance before I actually see a deal. So there's this commitment that you get, and then they move into the last stage, which is follow up on commitment, and when you win business is when they actually open an order. And so you have that, two-way dialogue, relationship, commitment, follow up on commitment, order, right? You could put that under needs analysis, qualifying, right? Like qualifying needs analysis, right? Like commitment, contract signed. And so I just know that there's activities that go for each one of those phases, right? So like how many conversations are you having? And really from a management standpoint, I just want to manage the number of conversations that you're having. If you're having an issue with getting them from zone 1 to zone 2, meaning building the relationship, like that's where we spend the time training. So if I'm having 100 conversations, but I'm not getting any commitments, right? Or if I have 100, I know everybody on my tribe, I know everything about them, but nobody is giving me a commitment. Like I need to talk to you about how you're asking, or I need to ask the question, are you asking? Right? And so the training is really centered around, right? How are you moving somebody from one to the next stage in the pipeline? That's where we focus our training. And the rest of it is, how do I set systems up so you can do the numbers? Because if you just do the numbers, you should be able to, in most cases, be able to kind of like, and this is certainly true of transactional, a little bit harder on relational, but you should in most cases be able to say, I want to make this amount of money. I know what my commission structure is. So I need to have this many deals. If I want to do this many deals, I need to have, this many contracts. If I have this many contracts, I need to be able to have this many commitments to conversations and then that can tell you how many times you need to pick up the phone or talk to somebody every day, right? And so those ratios are going to be different for every, a little bit for everybody's sales process. But I think that's from a training standpoint. You have your process, you hold people accountable to the activities that they need that are going to get the results, and you coach on the conversion, going from stage 1 to stage 2 or stage 2 to stage 3 and stage 3 to stage 4. And that's where we focus our training. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. Like this is why my first sales manager when I was at Pearson was so awesome. I mean, looking back, at the time I knew he was really good because he helped me a lot. But the more I learn about sales and hear these kinds of processes, I'm like, man, this guy really had it. Maybe he just did it by accident, but I really think he knew what he was doing. Because like in my case, I was 22 years old, working from my apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina. My sales manager was in Raleigh, Durham. He was managing 10 sales reps all over North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina, parts of Tennessee, right? So, and he's working from home. So he can't be there for sales conversations. Like he doesn't know. He knows, are you talking to people on campus? And so like the way he managed activities was like, and basically he told me this, is like the top performing reps in our company are on campus every day from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So make sure you're on campus every day from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., including Fridays. Like that was an activity he made sure that I did. The second activity was I had a second sales manager who followed up with him, and he's like, 20 touches. When you're on campus every day, get to 20 touches every day. If you get 20 touches every day, like leave a card, leave a note, stop by, have a conversation, follow up on a sample, you're going to be a top performer, right? That was another activity. Another activity was when a sale reaches a certain stage, if you see these signals in the sale, immediately email me. And then we're going to get the home office involved. We're going to have a subject matter expert come in on campus. We're going to have an editor or a marketing manager come in and do a presentation. Like these activities, he's just like, if you do these things, I'm going to trust that I hired the right person that's not going to walk into the office and do stupid stuff or say stupid things.
Totally.
Just manage those activities. And then for reps, if you're doing those things, like you said, and you're still not successful, then it's like, okay, well, like you said, Joe, like, are you asking for the business? Are you talking price? Have you talked about implementation and training? If you're not doing those things, then that's where we fill the gaps because you're already doing the right activities. Now it's just giving you the content and the context for the right to doing those activities, optimizing those activities.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I mean, I feel the same way. Like on my past, I worked for a guy named Paul Mush and then Whitney Merrill at Legal Match. And they like literally helped me through this, like understand like the process from commission to like the number of times I needed to dial the phone. Right. And being able to understand like there's a correlation between results and activities. Right. And it's just, if you manage the activities, the results come. And honestly, it's why, you know, I don't give our salespeople quotas. Funny, I just read an article on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago about it. And it's like, it has a lot of lively discussion to say, but like I don't give people quotas because I have an expectation, but I know that if I can manage their activities, like the results come and they exceed by far, you know, the company number or whatever my number I'd give them, especially if you got the right salespeople in place.
Well, yeah. And like, how often does that quota actually put a cap on their own personal expectations? Like if you have a person who, like you said, hey, I want to earn X dollars per year. Like if I'm sitting there and like, hey, my husband and I, we're going to, you know, we want to save enough money to buy a house. And in order to buy a house, we need to save another $30,000 for a down payment, which means I need to net $30K in my next bonus check, plus another 10 because I have to pay off bills. So I got to net $40K, which means I have to, you know, triple sales. If that's the thing I really, really want, that's way more meaningful than some quota that you might put on me, that if I hit my quota, I'm going to get a $20,000 bonus check.
For sure. Okay, I have a great story about this. So this happened yesterday. So we had our sales meeting, and we do that twice a month. You asked that, I never asked that question. We do a sales meeting twice a month. And so I had a rep come up to me, and she's like, hey, Joe, do you remember about 4 years ago, we were talking about like buying a house. And you said to me that like, if I really wanted to buy a house, I needed to know what color the door was. Right. And so I say that because it's like, I want you to think through the details of like what you're getting yourself into, because everybody loves the idea of buying a house in concept. Right. But if you don't really understand the details, like you get it. And so she's like, and I don't know if you remember, but I told you that the door was red. And I said, awesome. And she's like, so she pulled up a picture on her phone and she showed me a red door of the new house that she's in escrow on. And so that was a conversation that happened 4 years ago. And she's like gotten to the place and she's bought this house that has a red door. And it's just the power of connecting people to what they want and are motivated by is so far greater than the, you know what I mean? Like any result that I need them to get for me. And when you do that and then empower them through training and coaching to just give them the tools, right, to do it, like the things that they do can be magic. And super fulfilling. Like that made my entire day yesterday. I was like, you got a house, yes. You know, like so amazing.
Yeah, it's so impactful as like the impact we can have as managers. Again, like whether you're managing salespeople or engineers or product people or an HR team, I think like that process of connecting, you know, individually with what do you want and helping that person set up a track so they can get to that place that they want to go.
Totally.
That's really motivational to hear. I think that's a really good, I would love to keep going. I know we're also at the top of the hour, so I think it's a really good place to maybe put a pause on things. I'd love to pick up, you know, at another time, maybe do a part 2 and talk about management and all those other things. In the meantime, where can people find you? You mentioned this article on LinkedIn. So I know you're on LinkedIn pretty frequently. I've seen you there. Where's the best place for people to get a hold of you? And specifically, you want to give a shout out for your company or anything else that you want to talk about?
Yeah, pangogroup.com is our company website, PANGOGROUP, Pango Group. Pango means trust, so in Latin. So that's our website. You can find me on LinkedIn if you just look up Joe Curtis. I'm not super active on Twitter, although I think I have an account at Pango Joe, but it'll take me a little while. But I'm pretty responsive on LinkedIn. Anybody can email me. You can find my contact information on the Pango Group website or jcurtis@pangogroup.com. But yeah, just love the dialogue, and Scott, love what you're doing. And it's been a super fun conversation.
Yeah, I'm really glad we had a chance to dive in deep and do this. I incorrectly referred to your company as Panjo and not Pango Group earlier.
Banjo, I love it.
Apologize
like banjo. Or the banjo music.
But yeah, for those listening, Joe, I've known Joe for probably about 10 years now, coming up to 10 years, because you were, at the time, you were at Pickford Escrow, and we found each other because I was at Altos Research, and we ended up providing subscriptions to your title reps back then as part of the relational sales and relationship building.
That's right.
And,
you were good.
Been
you were very good.
You've been thank you. I appreciate that. You've been a great friend and a good person to know over the years. And we don't talk very often, but whenever we do, I always feel like, man, I got to talk to Joe more often.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. Scott, need more Sambucci time for sure.
All right, we can do that. We can definitely do that. Well, listen, man, I'm gonna let you get back to your day so you can get some more deals closed for you and your team.
Right on.
As soon as we get the episode out, we'll ping you so you can share it with your tribe, and your sales reps can share it with their tribe if they want to. And we'll talk again soon. Sound good?
All right. Thanks, Scott.
Take care, bud. Thanks, Joe. See you, man. Bye. Bye. All right, folks, that is my conversation with Joe Curtis, Chief Operating Officer over at Pango Group, not Panjo, Pango Group. I've got a bunch of notes here on my iPad, just a couple of things I want to highlight from the conversation. Before I do that, I also want to say, if you've made it this far in the podcast, thank you so much for listening. If you made it this far, it probably means that you really enjoyed the conversation and everything that we're doing here with the Startup Selling Show. So I would really, really appreciate it if you do two things for me. One is go over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to the podcast, wherever you listen to the Startup Selling Show, and leave a review. Tell us how we're doing. Tell everyone else what you like about the podcast. And that's one of the ways that we can spread the word. The second way, which is my second ask for you, is to just tell a friend or 10 about the podcast. So we're doing everything we can to bring in unique guests, talk about different topics that I know are important and tactical and actionable for you every single day as you're out there growing and scaling your company. So the more that we get the word out, the more that we see downloads go up and subscriptions go up, and you see all those numbers go up and to the right, just like with your sales numbers, the more jazz we get and the more motivation it gives us to keep bringing you this content. We're getting close to 100 episodes total now between the guests that we've done and the Daily Dose episodes that we've done in the past. I don't know what the exact count is. We're getting pretty darn close to 100. We've been doing this now for almost 4 years, and nothing jazzes us more than seeing those numbers continue to go up. So please do share this show with a friend or 10. So as far as a couple of the keynotes that I've got here in front of me is number one, getting really clear about the difference between a transactional sale and a relational sale. And in both cases, you still need to build a relationship. It's just that a transactional sale is different than a relational sale. And Joe and I talked pretty heavily about the process for running through a transactional sale, especially thinking through how many conversations does it take. Using his numbers, 8.6 conversations in his world to get to a sale. And knowing those numbers and being able to track that and understanding your data so that you can train towards the outcomes that you need from your sales team, I think are really, really important. He talked to the idea of terminal uniqueness syndrome, and that's the idea that all of us feel like, okay, yeah, that sales is sales, but my company is different, my product is different, my market is different. Well, it turns out in most cases, the same stages of the sale apply across most enterprise B2B sales. What's different is how are you executing on those stages? What kind of training are you giving to your reps? Are you clear about some of those key metrics and activities that you know that you and your team need to hit in order to get to the sales numbers that you need to hit? There's usually not some kind of magic potion or magic dust that you can throw onto a sale. There's a process that needs to happen. So number one, you need to know what that process is. And then number two, you need to execute on that process correctly. And then number three, you need to make sure you're managing towards those numbers and those KPIs and those indicators to make sure that you and your team are on the right track. A couple of the other key things that he talked about was the importance of a follow-up system. And that's where we got into those 8.6 conversations. So it's not just like pinging somebody once on email or putting them through an email sequence. It's actually following through with those conversations and having additional conversations so you can build the relationship that you need in order to get from a prospect to a customer. We also talked about the importance of being your authentic self. And so whether it's you as a founder that's going out and doing the selling, or you're hiring your sales team, it's not just about giving them a tech stack and then telling them to push a bunch of buttons on our automation. It's about putting the right person in place that you would trust to represent your company and allowing them to be their authentic person and helping them to speak human to the other side of the table for the prospect. Because if you do that, then you can just manage to the activities that you know are requirements to being successful in the sales process, as opposed to worrying about every little conversation and every little email and every little nuance that goes into the communication that's going out to those prospective customers. And then lastly, one of the last topics we talked about very briefly was quotas. And this is a topic I get all the time from clients or startup founders, like, how do I build my territories? How do I set my quotas? Well, there's a perspective there. You don't need to build quotas, right? If you have a territory that's well-defined and you have the ability for a motivated salesperson to perform, why put a cap on them by giving them a quota? Instead, ask them how much they want to earn and then show them what their commission would be if they hit certain numbers in certain activities and they hit certain sales numbers. So anyway, just a new perspective. I've heard this in the past about no quotas, but it was really good to hear Joe talk about how he's actually implemented this with Pango Group. So listen, again, thanks so much for listening. This has been a hoot. Like I said, Joe is a guy that I've known now for about 10 years, somebody I really trust professionally and personally. He's a really good dude, as you can tell. He thinks a lot about this sort of sales management thing. He's done it with a couple different companies and done it successfully, which is why I had him on the show. So that's it for now. This is Scott Sanducci signing off.